Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrea Williams. I'm an instructor at Blue Planet Scuba and a board member of Reef Renewal USA. It is my honor right now to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Kevin Macaulay. He is the operations manager at Reef Renewal USA. He's been a coral expert, if you will, a marine biologist for over 14 years in the Florida Keys, and he brings a wealth of knowledge to his position and the work that he does. In his most recent position, he worked at Nova Southeastern University in their Coral Disease Intervention Library. During his time at NSU Lab, he designed and implemented research and monitoring programs to gain better understanding of coral disease intervention. He also has experience in managing grants and budgets and all that fun stuff, but his scientific, he's conducted, over 4,000 scientific dives, and he's monitored, assessed, and treated thousands of coral colonies for SCTLD. I won't go into that now because I know that he's going to talk a great deal about that in his presentation. He has a deep appreciation for understanding of the spectacular diversity of ecosystems and the communities within them. But he also understands the hardships that are facing them, the extreme hardships that are facing them. In addition to his professional achievements, he has an extensive knowledge. I don't know what that was. He has an extensive knowledge in marine maintenance, including diesel, gas, electrical systems. He is a resident of a self-sustaining sailboat, which he built out himself with solar, wind, and compost systems. And he lives the sustainability he believes in. He is also a proud foster dog dad. Kevin is passionately devoted to long-term preservation of the coral reefs and committed to the philosophy of sustainability, and making him a well-respected member of the Coral Reef Society and within marine biologists. That's a hard thing to say real fast. Thank you, Kevin. Welcome. I will turn it over to you. Please note, folks, at the end of this presentation, there will be opportunity for questions and answers, and please put your questions in the chat. We welcome you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Andrea and Heather and everybody at Blue Planet for hosting this tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here. Also, thanks to all of you guys for showing up out there in TV land out there. So we appreciate the participation tonight, and excited to be here with you to learn a little bit about what's been going on down here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everybody here. I got a little presentation worked up. And get started. So as you already heard, I am Kevin Macaulay, and I am the operations manager for Reef Renewal USA. And Reef Renewal USA is a coral restoration practitioner based in the Florida Keys. So that means we own and operate a number of coral nurseries down here. We grow out corals to outplant onto the reef, and we grow out corals to get to other partners to outplant onto the reef. So that's kind of the background of Reef Renewal and why I'm here with you tonight. But what we're really talking about here today is the 2023 heat stress event. And our rescue, recovery, and restore efforts surrounding that event. This event is actually still ongoing in a number of ways. It's not over yet. We do hope we are past the worst of it, but there is still a lot of hot water out there right now, and the corals are still showing those signs of stress. So that's what we'll be talking about here this evening. First off, just the basics about coral bleaching. What even is it? What's going on here with coral bleaching, and how does it happen? So corals are pretty complex organisms, actually. They, in fact, live with a roommate in there. They've got a buddy that lives with them. They have an algae that lives inside the coral with them. And this is a symbiotic relationship. So it means that they both get something beneficial out of this relationship. What the coral gets out of this is a bunch of nutrients. The algae actually lives inside the coral tissue. And while it's in there, it photosynthesizes. And it's producing a bunch of nutrients that the coral then can absorb and use as food. So the algae is a very important part of this equation here with the coral species. They really need those algae to feed themselves. They do have the ability to feed themselves without the algae, but corals are a stationary animal. They are an animal. I hear they look like pretty rocks a lot, but I think we all here know that they are not just pretty rocks. Corals are very important animals here. And while they can feed themselves, they really can't run around like other animals to go catch a bunch of prey. So they do have a mouth, and they do have tentacles on those polyps, and they can capture prey that's moving by them and consume that, but they really can't go out of their way to go get more food. So they depend heavily on this algae to really get a lot of nutrients in their diet. So when corals get stressed, this algae relationship starts to break down. And corals can be stressed for a number of reasons. In this case, this summer, it's a heat stress event. That's the main driver of the bleaching event. But if you see on the right-hand side of the screen there, there's a number of different ways that corals will bleach and a number of different reasons they will bleach. So heat is just one of many. Also pollutions, poor water quality will stress a coral out. There's a number of ways that this can be done. The sun, believe it or not, corals can actually get sunburned a little bit. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more later in the talk here. But even too much exposure to the sun can be bad for a coral. So whatever the reason is, the coral will become stressed and then they'll bleach. And the mechanism on how that happens is actually still a little unclear. The way that the coral kicks the algae out, we're still trying to figure out just how that happens, but we know that it happens and we know it's due to stress. So there's some new research out actually that suggests it might be the algae that's stressed, and then they start to produce some chemicals the coral isn't a big fan of, and so they give them the boot. Either way, though, we know it's due to stress, and in this case, it's due to heat stress. So once a coral becomes bleached, they are stark white. Corals their structures are made out of calcium carbonate, which is very similar to the bones in your body. So they're bright white once they lose all those algae, and that stark skeleton can be seen clear across the reef just about. Anybody who's been out there on a reef that has some bleaching corals, you can pick them out. Your eyes almost just drawn to them. They're so white, they're almost glowing out there actually. So they're easy to see once this happens too, but that's the mechanism we're talking about here. That's what coral bleaching is all about. So what does it mean for the corals once they become bleached? What happens? Why is that a big deal? Well, first of all, it's a common misconception that corals are actually dead once they bleach. And that's not true. They're very stressed for sure, but they do have a chance of recovery still at that point. When they're bleached, we just learned the algae's gone, so they are starving to death, essentially, is what's happening. When without that extra input from the algae and the nutrients they get, the corals are struggling to feed themselves. So just like you and I, you can go a couple of days without eating food. It's not going to kill you, but it's not fun. It's not an enjoyable situation. They're very stressed about it. But unlike us, they don't have a ton of reserves. They're a little coral. So a small coral is only got a few days worth of reserves in there. They can maybe last a few days to a week once they're bleached. Larger corals have a little bit more reserves. They can maybe do 2 to 3 weeks once they start bleaching, but they do have a chance for recovery in that time. If the conditions that cause them to become stressed are removed, then the coral will reabsorb new algae and they'll recover. They'll go about their day. They'll get what they need from that. So bleaching isn't the end of the coral. There's still some intervention steps that can be taken at that point, and there's still ways to save that coral. But the big one this year is, as we've been saying, the heat stress. There's no way to cool the ocean down on that scale. So we've had to come up with some different creative solutions to deal with this event this year, and we'll be talking about that as well today. The other thing that the bleaching does, though, to the corals, because they're in such a stressed state, they're more susceptible to disease. Just like you and I are. We all know that when you're not getting enough sleep, when you're working too hard, you're running a little ragged, you're more susceptible to catch a cold or something. That's the same in the corals. So the bleaching themselves doesn't kill them, but it is the things that occur after the bleaching, the starving and the disease that can move in after that are the real killers of the coral in this situation. So what is it about this year that makes it so different? Why is this year such a big deal? Why are we all hearing about all the bleaching this year? Because we have had mass bleaching events in the past. This isn't a unique event in the historical record. It is unique in the sense of the scale of it and the length of it so far, though. So we do have some analogs sort of in the past of wide-scale bleaching events, but we've never really had anything quite like this. This is unique in a number of ways, and some of those ways are listed here on the screen, but one of the big ones is that it started a lot sooner than it normally does. This heat stress events have unfortunately become kind of commonplace down here in the Caribbean, and year over year, the waters have been getting warmer. We've seen this trend for years, but this jump that we've seen this year is dramatic. It started about 4 to 5 weeks before the heat normally starts. Normally it's about the middle of August when things really start to get hot down here, and then we start to have the bleaching problems. But as you can see from the chart graph here at the bottom, all the way back on July 1st, we were having pretty hot water already. And even some of the modeling shows that there were indicators in June of this year showing that this was on the way. So it started a lot sooner than we normally see the heat stress down here. And because it started sooner, it's also lasting longer. And that length of time that the coral sits in that hot water, as we just learned, is really the problem. They can take an afternoon of heat, and they may even bleach from an afternoon of heat. But if that water cools back down shortly thereafter, within a day or so, then they'll recover from that. The big problem here is how long this heat is lasting. It is also a problem, though, about how hot it has gotten. The higher temperatures like this have never been recorded before. In fact, a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard that we recorded a temperature of just over 101 degrees in Manatee Bay, up in Florida Bay, which is right here at the top of the Keys. So that type of temperature has never been recorded before. That is a world record, and I know there's been some controversy over that number if you've been following along, but I'm here to tell you it is an accurate number. It was an accurate reading. There was nothing wrong with the machine that took it. The location of the meter, though, is not typical of Keys geography. It is in a section of Florida Bay that doesn't get a lot of flow, and it's got a very muddy bottom, and so there are some factors that made it warmer, but the fact is the water was still that warm. Those aren't the temperatures we saw on the reef, but those water temperatures did exist in the bay and the surrounding areas during this time. The water did get hot enough, though, to create a third condition this summer, which is a hypersaline event. So this is when water gets so warm, it can start absorbing more things. And we all know that when water is warmer, it holds more stuff. In the morning, you can get more sugar into your coffee and tea when it's hot. So we all are aware of that phenomenon, but it happened on a large scale this time, and most of Florida Bay became hypersaline. And so when the water gets warm and it collects more salt, holds more salt, it becomes more dense and heavier. Therefore, it sinks to the bottom, unlike normal warm water, which stays at the top, at the surface normally. This warm water got so dense it sank, and then with tidal flux throughout the day, this water is washing over the reef a couple of times a day, every day. So that was also a pretty unprecedented situation. We've learned a lot about that and how that can happen and how to predict that in the future through this event. But those are the three factors that combine to make this such a devastating event down here this year. It started sooner, it's lasting longer, and the hypersaline really took it out. This chart here down below is data from one of our nurseries. Our Eastern Dry Rocks nursery is a little bit off of Key West. And this data shows 3 different temp loggers that we have there. We have one near the surface of the water, we have one in the middle of the water column, and we have one down kind of by the floor, down by the ocean bottom. And what you can see here is this red line on the graph at 30 degrees Celsius. That line that's 86 degrees Fahrenheit, that line represents the threshold for coral bleaching. So once the water gets to 86 degrees, we start to see bleaching. Not every coral on the reef is going to bleach at that point, but that is when we start to see bleaching in various species across the reef. And as you can see, for the entire time from July 1st through August 17th, through August 17th, that threshold was we were very rarely below that threshold with the water temperatures. Almost all of our readings were exclusively above that threshold, and orders of magnitude above it. Some of the higher readings that we have on the graph here actually represent water temperatures in the low 90s, 91, 92, and 93 degrees we're seeing at the bottom, almost at the bottom of the nurseries. So these are very alarming numbers. And again, it's that length. For the corals to sit in that water that long is a very stressful thing for a coral. This heat map here is a great product that NOAA puts out. You can all find this on NOAA's website. That's where I got it. This one was created just yesterday, actually, and this is showing the current heat stress data in the Caribbean right now. And as you can see, the Florida Keys, I think I can even zoom in here. Yes. So the Florida Keys is still in a alert level 2. Even right now, just yesterday, we're still in alert level 2, which is the highest alert level available in this system. But it's not just here in the Florida Keys. As you look over here into the Gulf of Mexico and Florida Bay, this water is exceptionally hot. And that's a huge volume of water in there we're talking about. This is also Caribbean wide, as you can see. This level 2 alert is all the way through the Windward Islands and throughout most of the Caribbean. So in many ways, this event is not over. We are not done with this heat stress event, and we are still in rescue mode in a lot of ways. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that's been meaning for us and what we've been doing throughout in light of all this. So the reef renewal approach has been 3-pronged largely so far. And you can see here we've created a deep water nursery. We've helped participate in and create a gene bank for all the genotypes of the corals. And we've also created a land-based facility for ourselves to store some of the corals on land through the heat stress. And as you can see from the photos on this page, it took an unbelievable amount of collaboration to get that done. on a scale like I've never seen before. Truthfully, I've been doing this kind of work over 15 years, and the amount of people that jumped in and how quickly they jumped in was really amazing to see. So that's been one of the silver linings in this event, is everybody's really pulled together very well, and we've all worked as a great team and a great unit to really do all we can to get these corals saved. So that's been a big silver lining. But let's dig a little deeper into all three of these things. What exactly are all three of these things? So the first one here is the gene bank. This is an idea that's actually been floated around for a while now and was sort of in the beginning phases of getting done, but this event really put the pedal to the metal on it and really got us motivated and everybody else motivated to get a gene bank made. And so what we did is all the coral practitioners down here, all the restoration practitioners, anybody that's growing a coral, Reef Renewal, us, of course, CRF, Moat, anybody else that's growing a coral, we all collaborated very closely on this, along with the Florida Aquarium, as you can see, and the Reef Institute, and CRF was very instrumental in helping us transport some of these things. But we got all the known genotypes between all the practitioners together. We got a whole genobank formed, and we got them up to the Florida Aquarium and also at the Reef Institute. That's where they're actually being held. So now with that information, we now have every known acroporid genotype in the Keys in the gene bank. So even if the worst case scenario were to occur and we were to somehow lose every coral out there, which I'm not saying is going to happen, don't panic, but if that were to happen, we would still have the genetic diversity preserved at these institutions, and we could theoretically restart all of these projects and restart nurseries with what we have there. You see some of the sizes down in these photos. They're pretty small pieces oftentimes that are going into these gene banks, so it's going to be a little bit onerous to restart an entire nursery from these things, but we have the option. It's there, it exists. We will never lose those now. So we're very fortunate to have gotten that done in the time we did there, and it took a lot of people and a lot of organizations coming together to get that done as well. Next up, we have our land-based tanks. This was a scramble for everybody as well. All the practitioners participated in this, and we've all got our corals spread out in various facilities throughout South Florida mostly. Unfortunately, we started running into some space issues when we all started looking around for tanks. When the water got too warm, a lot of people's first ideas was to start pulling some of these corals out to get them into a temporary holding facility, and because of that, space filled up, and there isn't a lot of space, especially down in these tiny islands in the Keys, for large aquaculture facilities. So while we were fortunate enough to have some partners that could take some of our corals for us, we had to build something ourselves in the end here. And so this tank, the photos you can see here represent what Reef Renewal has created for this. We've got a great partner on this, Aquarium Encounters. They're based right here in Marathon. So if you're ever down this way, definitely check them out. They are amazing partners, and they really facilitated this for us, gave us the space and helped us with the tanks, and they're also helping us ongoing to help keep the coral healthy while they're in there. They're helping with water qualities and feedings and making sure the light's right and the temperature's right and the flow of the water is all right and the water quality is perfect. So they're very good partners. But this is our facility on land, and you can see just how many corals we had to move in here. What's in here represents approximately 2,000 different corals. From 3 different locations. We brought corals in from the Tavernier nursery, which are the ones you can see in the bottom photo. Those Acropora palmatas hanging on the trees there. We also brought corals in from our Marathon nursery and also from our nursery down south at Lou Key. So this represents a pretty big genetic diversity and definitely a big geographic range where the corals that we were able to save through this event. And the majority of the corals that we were able to get into this tank have recovered at this point. So we're very, very thrilled with that. We're very pleased with that information and how the progress is going there. Something we did learn in this process, though, it makes sense based on what we all learned together earlier tonight, but something we learned in here is that getting these corals fed while they're in captivity is actually a very crucial part of this process. They were recovering in the tank, but not quite as quick as we wanted. So we reached out to some coral experts who deal with them in the tanks more often than we do. And we found out that, yes, there's supplemental feeding for them, and we need to get that in there. And as soon as we did, the corals really started to perk right back up. So the last few weeks, there's been great amounts of recovery in that tank, and things are really looking up there to the point where we are starting to make plans for what do we do? Things are growing a little bit even. So we need to start figuring out where we go from the future and how we get these back into the ocean when the temperatures come down, because they're looking pretty good in there. I do have a quick video here. I'm hoping this will work for us while we're all together, but of us feeding some of these coral while they're in our tanks, actually. Hey, there we go. Can you guys see that, hopefully? Maybe not. All right, not
Yeah,
sure,
videos.
but we'll move
Yeah,
on.
Heather here. Sorry, the video's not showing up, but
Nope. All right, we'll move on. Sorry. It's a cute video. It's also on our social media. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram and see us feeding the corals in the tank.
absolutely. Excellent.
So the third prong of our approach at Reef Renewal was our deep water nursery. So generally our coral nurseries are in pretty shallow water. Between 20 to 30 feet is our general standard setup for these things. And that's for a lot of reasons. That's where we're going to want to outplant them. That's where they generally a lot of these species naturally occur, especially the acroporids don't really occur naturally in much deeper water. So it just makes sense. That's where our nurseries are most of the time. But when this heat stress came along, we decided we need to think outside of the box a little bit. And this particular response is really where we stand out between the other coral practitioners. We created a deep water nursery. We took these corals from our shallow water nursery and moved them to 70, 80 feet of water. And we did that for a few different reasons. Obviously, one of them, we were hoping that the water temperature was going to be a little bit cooler down there at that depth. And it was to the tune of about 2 degrees, 3 degrees, somewhere in there. So not a dramatic difference on the temperature, but enough, turns out. The other major reason, though, and we touched on this earlier, UV protection. Corals actually can become sunburned, like we talked about in one of those first slides. When they're getting too much light exposure, they can bleach because of that. And that's very evident in species that branch, like what you're seeing in the background there. Branching corals, when they're already stressed and starting to bleach, the tops of them will be almost completely bleached or completely bleached, and the bottoms will look almost normal even sometimes. So there's obviously another factor in there besides just the heat, and that's the UV. So getting them into 60, 70, 80 foot of water just puts more water on top of them, which is essentially just natural shading. In fact, the picture you're seeing on the background here is of our shallow water nursery and not our deep water nursery, because when we tried to get a photo to represent our whole deep water nursery like this one, I could really only see one branch at a time because it's that much darker down there. So it looks identical to this, but it's just out in deeper water. So to get all that done was a huge undertaking, actually. You know, we were sitting around brainstorming what to do about this, and this idea popped up, and we said, sure, let's go do that. Well, little did we know what that was going to take to actually accomplish. So you see a few of our partners listed here on the screen. There were many more, though, involved. And things got done that have never been done before. This is an unprecedented thing to have done. And the support we got from our institutional partners and from outside was also incredible. Folks like the Army Corps of Engineers. We needed new permits to get this done. That's normally a 6-month process to a year, longer sometimes even. And they turn some of these around in a day or less for us even. So seeing the collaborations again and joining up as a team and really seeing everybody work together has been one of the big silver linings in this event. Whenever these types of tragedies occur, you always got to look for those silver linings. And that's one of the big ones. Everybody really came together and everybody's working very well together to save as much of these corals as we can. So what else are we doing here at Reef Renewal? That's our immediate bleaching response, but where do we go from here? What do we do next? What's the future of this look like? Well, nobody knows for sure. I'm not going to sit here and tell you we know exactly what's going to happen next. And in big way, we can't know right now because, as I mentioned, we're still in the middle of this heat stress event. We saw the map of how hot the water still is. So we can't really start planning the future until we know what the result of this heat event is. There are definitely plans we can start, but a number of things are going to depend on just what survives this event. But what does survive this event is going to be a big building block for the future. Here at Reef Renewal, we don't really believe that the corals of today are going to exist tomorrow. We are going to have to build the corals of tomorrow. And don't get crazy, we're not doing the Terminator thing over here, but their parents exist today. We're going to just need to use them to create hardier corals. Some of the corals, if they do survive this event, what does survive this event? They're going to be sturdier corals than their neighbors that didn't survive. The corals that make it through and recover are the ones that can tolerate heat a little bit better. So we're going to need to find the ones that can also tolerate disease a little bit better and make some new corals with those ones. They'll be the same genus and species and everything. They'll just have hardier genetics underlying that. And we really believe strongly that that's a big part of the future of coral restoration is we have to get more targeted with our efforts. Just growing any old coral and planting it on the reef was just proven to not work very well. We're going to need to be selective in which corals we work with and which corals pass certain milestones in order to reach breeding capacity. So a big part of our future is building out an even bigger land-based facility. Our nurseries are very important and we're going to keep that work going, but we're also going to build out a facility on land down here in the Keys to do some of this work. These are not things that you can get done while you're in situ, out in the ocean rather. So we're going to need to have these corals on land, in labs, in raceways, in a building that we can work on them with and do some of this testing on. So a big part of our future is going to be getting into selective breeding programs and pioneering land-based propagation for these things, because what we've been doing up till now is not going to move us further. It's been great base and foundation for this, but coral restoration as a whole needs to start thinking of a bigger future. We also think on an ecosystem-wide scale here at Reef Renewal. So while our main focus is and will remain coral restoration, that encompasses a larger world. You cannot just replace a coral and expect the ecosystem to recover. We need to get more urchin propagation going. The spiny urchins, I'm sure you all know, had a huge die-off down here in the 1980s, and those guys graze the reef. They eat up a bunch of the algae, and without that clear space on the substrate, the coral can't grow, it can't expand, and they definitely can't settle when they're larvae. So we need sponges as well. They filter the water down there. We need to do a big recovery on our sponges. So we're going to need these land-based facilities for various propagation techniques, not just corals. We're thinking on an ecosystem scale, and we want to make sure that we're treating every piece of that ecosystem, because you can't pull on one thread without the whole sweater unwinding. These things are all connected together, and they've all got to be dealt with together. So that's a big part of our plans for the future at Reef Renewal here. What can you do though to help us along the way, and how can you be a part of what we're doing? Volunteer obviously is a big one. If you have the ability, if you're in South Florida certainly, or we have Reef Renewal affiliates all throughout the Caribbean even. But volunteering is really the base of our workforce here at Reef Renewal USA. We are a very community dependent organization. We really depend heavily on local volunteers, but also volunteers that come from all over the place. We've got great training programs on our website, so you can get yourself up to speed and ready to jump in the water and go on day one as soon as you get here. So if you're interested in volunteering, please check out our website, reefrenewalusa.org. We've got all the information on there about how you can get involved from wherever you are. Another great way to help the reef, of course, is to spread the word. Events like this, tuning into stuff like this, learning about exactly what's going on and figuring out for yourself what the details are, and then getting that word out to other people. That's huge. That's one of the biggest tools in our toolbox currently is getting more awareness and more eyes on this problem. It's a really difficult problem for most people to even know about yet, let alone understand. If you're sitting on your couch in Wisconsin somewhere and you've never been scuba diving, how are you going to know that this thing 5 miles offshore underwater is in trouble? So getting the word out about what's truly going on the reef and getting more eyes on this problem is one of the biggest tools we have in our toolbox. And of course, donate. That's something all nonprofits need to have. We need folks to donate to us just like everybody else does to keep this good work going forward. So if you have the ability on that, we would certainly love for you to participate in that way as well. So that's the ways you choose one. You volunteer, though, is my personal favorite. Like I said, we depend heavily on those volunteers, and if you have the ability to get down to the Keys to do this with us, we'd love to see you. And that's about all I had planned here for the evening. I got through it a little bit quicker than I was thinking I would, but time to open it up for questions, I guess, if anybody's got any.
That was fantastic. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Did you want us to type them in or raise hands and ask questions?
Yeah, if you don't mind raising your hands. I know we also had a question that came in over the chat. So maybe we can start with that one, and then we'll have people raise their hands and I can call on you to do that. For the first one, I'm going to go ahead and jump on the one that came through the chat. How sustainable is this? This is Andy's question. It seems that like there are a lot of moving parts. The list of involved parties alone is staggering. Are you hopeful or pessimistic?
Oh, well, you bring up some good points, but let me start off by saying I'm very hopeful. I'm always hopeful. We have a lot of reason to be hopeful. We're learning a lot through this event, and we do have some great new partnerships through this event. Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it is a challenge. None of this is easy. That is correct, but I'm not overwhelmed by it. And a lot of those moving pieces in that list of partners were really crucial right there in the beginning when all this was getting set up. They're going to be very helpful partners moving forward as well, but they aren't crucial to the day-to-day operations of what Reef Renewal is doing. They were just really helpful screwing in 100 anchors out there in 80 feet of water. We're all divers here. We all know how much harder it is to work in 80 feet of water rather than 20 feet of water. So we brought in some tech divers and things for that. I mean, if it weren't for the NOAA buoy crew, we'd probably still be out there screwing anchors into the sand to get this done. So yes, it was a huge lift to get it done, but I'm hopeful because it got done and in record time. I never would have imagined when we had the idea that it would already be done. Truthfully, I've worked in this field a long time now, and I've never seen something move quite this fast. So yeah, it was a lot, but I'm very hopeful. I think we can sustain it. Yes.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and ask Min, who's raised her hand.
Thanks. So, hi, Kevin. I noticed you mentioned because we're still in the middle of this heat stress event. The nursery effort is still in the beginning or maybe even the middle stages. Does this mean, at least so far, there hasn't been any successful grafting or planting of any of the nursery corals yet?
So we paused all of our outplanting efforts during this. We have been outplanting corals for a couple of years past, 2-3 years in the past we have outplants from, but no, this summer we stopped all of those activities once we realized how the temperatures were looking. It just doesn't make sense. If it takes you a year and a half to grow this coral in a nursery, to go throw it out on a reef that's 90 degrees, common sense dictates we just don't do that. So we have successful outplants from the past. A lot of them did take a really hard hit this summer, though. We have very high mortalities on our outplants for sure. So once we started to see that, we paused those activities, and when they'll restart is an open question at this point. We're really hoping that by mid-October, the water is going to be cooled down enough that we'll be able to get the corals back out there. But that's an open question right now, as we saw on that heat map just yesterday. We're still in alert level 2, so we're not through this yet. And as far as when we get to outplanting again, we'll have to all wait and see together on that one.
That's just to follow up on that question. Do you think whenever that time comes, when it's time to return all of those corals back to the ocean, like, is that going to be a all hands on deck, like bring in volunteers from wherever you can to come down and assist with that?
So that's exactly how it was when we brought them all in and when we did the deep water nursery. I'm very hopeful that when we go to put them back out, we'll be a little bit more organized in the way we go about it. It was definitely a triage emergency situation before. But now that we've got them all there and we've got a good inventory and we've got everything organized real well, we're very hopeful that getting them back out is not going to be nearly the heavy lift it was bringing them in. That being said, we always accept volunteers, and if we're not doing that, we'll find something to do for sure.
Excellent. All right, Rachel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a handful of questions. My first one is, when you're moving these corals into the tanks, are you reintroducing the right zooxanthellae as well, or are you just feeding them enough that they don't need that, or is there enough left over that it can still propagate if they've been stressed?
Very good question. I was hoping somebody would ask that, actually. Yes, so they do pick up their zooxanthellae back in the tank. It's not anything we add. And let me preface all of this by saying I myself have learned a lot about corals in tanks in the last month or so. I've always dealt with corals in the ocean in my career, so this is all new to me and all fresh. So if I do misspeak and somebody else out there knows better, feel free to correct me. But in this case, I do think I know the answer here. And the facility we're in operates on well water. So it's naturally occurring aquifer water down there that does have tidal flush and everything, but it's a constant temperature. We go deep enough, there's a constant temperature and constant salinity. And because it's naturally occurring, it's in that water as well. So the zooxanthellae are just there. We do some filtration on that, though, because there is some stuff in it we don't want. There's some sulfur in there and all that stuff, but we're very careful to make sure that we keep the zooxanthellae in there. Great question.
Great, thank you. I'll let Bruce go, and then I have more questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kevin. This is really interesting. Most of what you talked about was the effective bleaching on your nursery stock and moving them in. I'm curious if you have any current estimates on the amount of bleaching in the natural in situ coral, and beyond bleaching, the proportion of mortality in the in situ coral out on the reefs.
Also great question. So I did mention that our outplants, at least the ones a little further south, the ones in the middle keys and lower keys, were hit pretty hard. We do have that data now. Probably in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% mortality at this point, which is pretty disheartening, but with the heat the way it is, we kind of expected that. We have a little bit less data right now, though, on the natural in situ corals. I have some anecdotal data I can share with you, but NOAA is currently, they just completed their first cruise throughout the Keys to assess this on a Keys-wide scale, and they're doing a follow-up cruise as soon as the temperatures come down to get the data. So they hopefully have it close to the beginning, and they'll have some after. So the broader scale, how's the reef doing with the bleaching? We're gonna have to wait and see a little bit longer, because again, we're still in the degree heating weeks. We're still having the heat stress, so we could still lose more coral from this point, unfortunately. Anecdotally, though, I'll say probably 90% plus of the Acropora species, elkhorns and staghorns, have bleached at this point, and I'd say probably 60%, 50 to 60% of the mounding and boulder corals have bleached at this point. So it's pretty tough out there for sure, but not all of them have. And so that's the hope. Those corals that are making it through this, we're going to be able to work with those into the future. And we've learned a lot in a short time with this. It's unfortunate that this is the way we're learning it, but we're going to be a lot better prepared moving forward.
Well, that's amazing. And that's, of course, 90% of an already depleted stock, right? So yeah, thank you.
Correct. Yes, we're already talking about a reef that is somewhere in the range of 1 to 2% of what it was when we started monitoring 60, 70 years ago. So yeah, pretty stunning losses, unfortunately.
Rachel, did you want have some more questions?
Yeah, I guess my first question is sort of related to that. Is there anything that your organization or any other organization is or even can do to help or support those in situ corals? Probably, but
We're kicking around a lot of ideas for sure. There's some things in the hopper. Nothing that we're really ready to put out there in a wide scale kind of way or anything. They're all just going to be small trial experiments, maybe of different ideas and in smaller sections to see if anything is effective. But the short answer is not yet. Not yet. There's a lot of people besides Reef Renewal working on that. As I've said, all these folks are really working closely together on this, and we're all shooting off in different directions with crazy different ideas on how we can help these things. But yes, stay tuned. We've got some exciting stuff in the pipe pretty soon, actually. So stay tuned.
my last question is about the work that you're doing in selective breeding, and trying to find and nurture and expand on these hardier corals. I'm running into a disconnect in my head between that concept, which sounds perfect and fantastic and absolutely wonderful, and the time scale of coral growth versus the time scale of change that we're dealing with. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I do, and you've put some thought into that question clearly. So very well done. Thank you. So you're right. Corals take a really long time to grow. They just do. And that's part of the broader problem out here on the whole reef. If these things could change their range like other things could, even on the scale of like trees, really, if they could change their range like that, we'd be having less of a problem right now. They probably would have scooted their way up to Virginia by now and we'd be fine. But you're right. The scale is hard. However, there have been a lot of really good advancements in growing corals over the last really just 5 years, maybe 10 years. Our methods have improved dramatically, and not always intentionally. There's been a number of major mistakes that have led to great breakthroughs in this. One of the most famous ones we all probably know is Dave Vaughn, and dropping a coral and then realizing when he put all the little pieces on tabs that they grew so much faster. So it turns out we now know when corals are really little, they grow really fast. So once they get to this size, they start slowing down. So we've been able at Reef Renewal to use that to our advantage in a number of ways. And one of the best ones that I can think of is when we outplant our corals, they generally go out at a size of about a quarter, somewhere in that size, in our boulder corals anyway. And so we make a little mound out of cement, and we'll fill that little mound with 8, 10, 12 of those, all about an inch or two apart. And all of those little pieces grow really fast that first year. So within that first year, they've all fused, and we put the same genotype on each one of those mounds. So they all fuse within a year. And now we've got a coral the size of a softball or bigger within just 1 year. So we've definitely made some big improvements on how we can grow with these. Can we still improve more? Absolutely. These are very slow growing things, and we're definitely looking out for the new ideas and what's next and how to speed them up. And there are some very interesting ideas out there in that realm as well. So some of them are tough to scale up maybe, but people are thinking about this stuff for sure. This is all things that people are trying to get done.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great questions. Anybody else out there have anything? Bruce.
Bruce raised his.
Yeah, I have another one to follow up on Rachel's line of questioning. I'm curious, when you were talking about the library of genotypes, you mentioned that you've got the full complement, at least of the known genotypes. Is that the known genotypes in your restoration collections? Because I also understood that there were groups that were going out to actually bring in samples of some of the in situ corals to ensure that the genetic diversity was maintained. Can you speak to sort of what our knowledge level is of the full array of genetic diversity on the reef?
Certainly, absolutely. Yeah, so when I was talking about that gene bank, I was actually primarily talking about the acroporid corals again. It's the elkhorns and the staghorns. The other ones, it's an ongoing process. We're going to try and work with other species to get them up there as well in the future. But the main thrust of that was the acroporids and cervicornis and palmata, because they're just the most endangered and they're the most fragile, and they react to these things in the biggest way. So they were first on the list. And as far as having every coral, obviously we don't have every coral. We have every coral known to all the coral practitioners, everybody who's doing this work, and it's assumed we have together the largest spreadsheet, if you will, I guess, largest spreadsheet of all the genobanks. If you put all three of us together, that's everything everybody knows about, just about. There's really not anybody else out there hunting unique genotypes and bringing them back, sending them off to get them genotyped and comparing what they've got. So these are really the three main groups that even do that work. So between the three of us, we assume we have every or almost everyone known to science at this point. However, that being said, yes, there are definitely more to still go find, and there are teams that are doing that, and thank goodness they are, because we need all the diversity we can possibly get into this thing. So when I said all of them, I just meant all the ones that we are aware of as researchers.
Yeah, no, I figured all of the, I was just curious if it was the genotypes represented in the restoration collections or also the genotypes represented out on the reach. But thanks for that clarification.
Yeah. We hope we have all of them that we know of. We think we have all of them that we know of. But people need to go out and see if there are different ones still, because especially with those two types of corals, they grow in thicket form. So you can get one individual genotype that covers an entire spur of the reef. You get all excited thinking, oh, look at all these corals, but in the end, it's actually just one coral that's on that whole spur, because it can clone when they frag and all that. So finding new ones is getting harder and harder all the time. But thank goodness, yes, there are groups out there still looking for them.
Yeah, and by the way, I work professionally on climate adaptation, and I've already been using the example of you guys going out to sort of rescue the genotypes as an example of sort of quick response and creative application in responding to this kind of a crisis. So
that's amazing. Very neat. Appreciate that. That's cool. Anybody else have anything they're curious about?
Yeah, so thank you. This has been really interesting to watch. One of the things that I thought when I saw the indoor tanks was just, you must have an incredible electric bill. And I was wondering if you could comment on the relative difficulty and or cost between the deep nursery and the land-based nursery. Given that before you were doing shallow stuff, and obviously you get a lot of services for free, right? When the water's agreeing,
Yeah.
decent temperature, but now you're going to environments where either you've got deeper divers or on land you have a lot of electric and you have to add food, whatever. So
Right. So now that you've brought that up, I don't think I made it clear that the deep water nursery was really just an emergency response. We don't intend on having the corals down there for good now. Once the water cools down, we want to bring them back to that shallow nursery because of a lot of things you just said. It's a lot harder to work down there. You go through your air quicker, you got deco issues. So we don't want them there permanently. That was really just a temporary idea, kind of like the tank, to try and get them into a cooler, better environment for them. That being said, the sanctuary was really impressed with this idea, and they really thought this was a good thing probably for moving forward, because unfortunately, while this heat is unprecedented this year, moving forward, it's going to become more normal, and we're going to be working towards these temperatures more and more. So once they saw the idea and they saw it in action, they decided they really enjoyed this idea, thought it was a good idea, and we're actually probably going to help the other practitioners install deep nurseries at their sites as well, because everybody, when this heat happens again, that might be the easiest thing to do, is just shuffle them all out to that deeper water rather than bringing them on land. And it's certainly less stressful for the corals that way. So yeah, hope that answered your question there.
Great. We've had a couple of other questions come in on the chat. One is, what are some books, websites, or other materials that we can use to learn or educate ourselves while we are landlocked? Are there any good resources we could be checking out?
Definitely all the practitioners have really informative websites at this point. You can find us all through social just to get started, but we're reefrenewalusa.org, so please check that out. And we're not alone. Yeah, most of the practitioners have great resources now. Frost Aquarium has a really great website that has a ton of resources on it. Go to the source on all this stuff, though. I always say go to the source. Go check out NOAA. Check out the sanctuary and NOAA. They have immense resources on their websites to the point you won't want to look at it again. You too much information almost. So anything you can want to imagine to know is out there on that NOAA website for sure, and more detail than, like I said, than you'd care to want, really. So great question, because furthering your education is always a great goal.
Awesome. And another question on the chat: in your efforts to capture diversity in genetics, are you sequencing both the algae and the coral?
Oh, wow. Great question. So a lot of the algae have been sequenced, actually. Well, I say a lot. Some of the algae have been sequenced already, and that work is ongoing. We did not do that work, but it is out there. I think Moat did quite a bit of it, actually, but there's FSU and Miami University, I know, are working on that as well. So not us specifically. Reef Renewal did not do that work, and for a while, we're not probably going to be the ones doing our own genetic work. I'm an ecologist. I'm a coral ecologist. I'm not a coral geneticist. While I'm willing to learn new skills, that's a whole different degree. That's a whole different thing. So we're going to need to bring in some new staff and people who are experts in this stuff to help us through that process. But in the meantime, we're not the only ones working on it, as I've been saying. So other people are doing some of this work as well. It's going to take that. We don't even know how many genotypes are out there of all the species combined and things. So no one place is going to be able to do all this on their own. That just won't be able to happen. So yes, that work is ongoing. We intend on having some of that in-house ourselves real soon here. But on a broader scale, both of those things are being looked into by quite a few people now at this point, thankfully. Because coral science as a whole is just so new. We didn't invent scuba until the 60s and 70s, and until then it was just not reasonable to get down there and study this stuff in its own environment. So coral science as a whole is just so new that when things like this pop up, the amount of questions someone like me, a researcher in this, immediately thinks of that we just don't have answers to is kind of astounding. It's a lot of fun in a lot of ways, because you get to learn new things and you get to share new knowledge with the world when you figure it out, but you feel woefully prepared sometimes in the moment when you're like, wow, I wish I knew 37 answers to 30 other questions in a textbook somewhere, but you just don't have that in this field. So everybody's working double time now, though, to try and figure this stuff out.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. And another question that I'm curious about, it has been such an incredible response in Florida, you and the other agencies and organizations that you mentioned working together. Do you know if anyone else, like in any other countries, have able to respond in the same way?
Sure. So Fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, fortunately, the wider Caribbean has not been as badly affected by this heat as we have. We've definitely had the highest temperatures, and that's mostly a geography thing. We're really close to Florida Bay and the Gulf of Mexico, which is relatively shallow water. And so that huge pool of water just sits out there and bakes and bakes and bakes all day. And so then when the tide flushes, it just rushes right over the Keys. So just geography wise, they're in a better position than we are. They're further away from that heat. It's harder for that water to get out there. So it just hasn't gotten as hot. That being said, yes, they are being more proactive out there than we were able to be because we didn't see it coming. Unfortunately, the last 10 years, we seem to kind of be the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the Caribbean on a number of issues, diseases and heat and everything else. So yes, they are taking actions out there. I know, again, Reef Renewal, we've got a number of partners out there. We've got Reef Renewal Bonaire and 4 or 5 others out there at least. You can go to their websites and check out exactly what they're doing because yes, they've got responses, but they're not nearly the scale that we were forced to do here, really. But they're not just sitting around though; they're working on it.
Great. No, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? I know that was a lot, so thank you so much for answering all of those and for this incredible presentation. Ooh, is that a follow-up, I think?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Harry, go ahead. Yeah, so really appreciate you answering the first question about sequencing both the algae and the coral. What sort of efforts are being made to correlate which algae grow best with which corals and determining, like, can we cross those 2 species in terms of getting more heat-resistant corals?
Very good question. And we're really just on the forefront of that knowledge and those questions. Those questions really just got asked for the first time just a few years ago. So, like I was saying, coral science as a whole is just so new. These are things we just hadn't gotten to yet, frankly, that we knew on some level probably needed to be done, but just had not had the time or the building blocks yet to get there. We just hadn't increased our knowledge enough to get to that point with the corals. So great question. It's happening as we speak, basically, is my answer to that, though. There's multiple folks working on that angle, and hopefully they come up with some good results soon, because I do think that's a huge part of the way forward here. In fact, I've been suspicious for a number of years now that this algae is actually the cause of a lot more of these problems than we think it is. And we've really, as a whole in the science community, kind of ignored that algae component for most of our time looking at coral. And so the algae side of this is definitely even newer than the coral side. But before this position here, I was working at Nova Southeastern University, as you heard, in a coral disease research lab. And our main focus was stony coral tissue loss disease, which just ravaged the Keys down here. Excuse me. But we did find that once a coral bleached, if it was sick with stony coral tissue loss disease, once it bleached, it kicked that coral disease right out. It was fine. It stopped the disease almost entirely. There's some very good data out there now from our project from the last few years showing that those two things don't happen together. So, and then most of those corals fully recovered from the disease and spent another year before they caught it again, unfortunately. But so yeah, I think that algae plays a much bigger role than it's been given credit for. And I know a lot of folks are looking into it right now, but very, very thoughtful question.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, do we have the ability to convince the coral to accept a different algae? Is that, I was sort of under the impression that they were pairs that kind of went together, or is that not?
So that was the thinking for a long time. Yeah, that was kind of the accepted thinking on that. We've learned, though, that's not entirely the case. They're definitely more dynamic than that, and they can take different kinds. And I know Moat in particular, Jason Spadaro over there has done, or no, not Jason, but Moat anyway, has done some good work in that area, and they have developed a specific zooxanthellae actually that they believe to be more heat resistant even. So yeah, they're more dynamic than we thought. Like I'm saying, I think we're really starting to learn that these algae are far bigger piece of this puzzle than we were giving them credit for.
That's fascinating. Does anyone have any other questions for Kevin?
There's been some good ones. I'll sit here all night. Don't be shy. Love talking about corals.
I mean, that was also interesting to hear about stony coral tissue loss disease. I had not heard that about, the bleaching kind of stops its progress. That's fascinating to hear as well.
Yeah, we really just made that correlation in the last year and a half. So all that data is actually still preprint right now, but hopefully we'll be getting that info out soon.
Yeah, have you noticed that I mean, I know it's hit the Keys and it's spreading throughout other parts of the Caribbean, but and different efforts are being made to stop that. But I mean, is that kind of now just taking a back seat, like get through this heat event and then see if it's still going to be an issue going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know that the people who are working on it and where it is still an active outbreak, they're out there still treating it and doing what they can with the antibiotics and the paste and everything that was developed here. But yeah, like I said, once the coral bleaches, more than 90% of the time, it ceases to be disease. So I'm sure they're all taking us in some ways a little sigh of relief over this, because I know how busy you stay doing that kind of work. So yeah, this that's kind of one more thing we're just gonna have to sit and learn about together on this one over the next month to 6 weeks as this water cools down.
Yeah, just waiting to see what happens. And then everyone's just lots of great comments about the presentation, good information. Can't wait to reach out and volunteer with Reef Renewal. On that note, someone is asking if you can talk a little bit more about volunteering.
Oh, sure, yeah. We offer a lot of opportunities for volunteering, and we actually offer an internship as well. So if you know anybody that's in that age range and looking for a marine science internship, we definitely would send them our way. We'd love to have them. But yeah, we have a number of different facets to our volunteer. We can definitely craft a volunteer day based on your skill sets and your needs and things. We've got, especially now, we've got corals on land, we've got corals in the water. So we've definitely got options right now. And we're, like I mentioned earlier, we're very community focused. We really believe strongly in engaging the community in this process is going to make it a stronger process and make it a more effective process. And especially down here, we all, it's our backyard basically down here, and we all depend on this. This is our livelihoods. This is our tourism base. This is our storm protection. This is everything to us down here. So bringing the community in and really engaging volunteers is really important to us here. And not just local ones, though. We absolutely love when people come down from somewhere else and want to volunteer with us, because we know they're going to take that experience back and hopefully tell somebody else about it and talk to it and spread this word even further. So our website has any information you may possibly want to know about what you can do to volunteer with us. We've got contact info on there for all the right people, and please check it out, reefrenewalusa.org. You can find out anything you want to know about us right there.
Absolutely. I know we've run trips in the past to do coral restoration down in the Keys, so we'll definitely reach out and see if we can start bringing some groups down to help you all at, all the different phases of reintroducing and helping out with the land-based corals and everything else.
Glad to have you.
Excellent, excellent. And it looks like, yeah, we have some other folks who are planning to travel down already. So you definitely have some new volunteers out of this presentation. So thank you again. And yeah, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us. I know, again, that as divers, this is something that's really near and dear to all of our hearts. So we are, just thrilled to learn more and see all the great work that you've been doing, and ways that we can hopefully get down there and get involved. So thank you again.
Well, my pleasure, and thank all of you for being here. And wasn't talking to an empty room, so thank you very much. I appreciate your dedication and your thoughtful questions too. You guys really were paying attention, so I appreciate it.